Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first ever virtual planning refresher workshop. I am Casey McPherson, the Senior Planner in the Community Development Office, which is part of DOLA's Division of Local Government. This should be an interesting afternoon together. The Planning Refresher Workshop is a high-level training that is usually held in person and upon request of the community. These requests typically come in when planning commissions undergo turnover or before a major endeavor like a comprehensive plan update. Another key piece of the usual way that we run these workshops is that the host community usually invites neighboring jurisdictions so we can have an even more robust conversation and do some peer learning. Today will be different in a few ways. First, we decided to do a statewide virtual workshop because we've had to cancel several in-person workshops across the state. So we wanted to make sure we had an alternative. And in fact, Estes Park is pictured here on this cover slide, and it's actually a PDF for ease of use, but on this cover here, because they were the first community we had to cancel on. So thank you for your patience and for joining, those of you from Estes. And second, we wanted to leverage this offering so that communities could continue to use it into the future. Since we don't yet know several things about when we'll be able to travel where or under what precautions. So to get over that as well, this statewide virtual workshop was born. Now let's talk logistics. So we've got a few logistics, disclaimers, ground rules. First, we're anticipating this meeting to run about 2 hours. When we run these workshops in person, they're usually 2 to 2.5 hours and very interactive. However, the same format doesn't work with this large and diverse group that we have today. So we did a test. We tested this virtual format with a workshop with the Town of Eagle. So thank you, Town of Eagle, for being the guinea pig. And we learned a few things about how to keep it smooth for this much larger audience, as well as those who will be watching at a later date, watching the recording, because yes, we will be recording this and posting it to our website. So to keep it smooth for our purposes today, there are 2 things to notice. First, you may have already noticed that you're muted. And second, I won't be able to switch my focus between presenting the information and keeping track of the questions in the chat, because that does make it a little clunky. But like I said, because interactivity is usually a huge feature of these workshops, we do have some solutions for you. So the Community Development Office Director, Andy Hill, has agreed to moderate the chat window. So thank you, Andy. This means if you have a question or if you have a story or an example you'd like to share with the group, please throw it in the chat at any time. Clarifying questions will be addressed, and those digging deeper will be managed in the chat or responded to after the workshop. So because this format doesn't really lend itself well to that one-on-one discussion, please feel free to reach out by email, by phone at any time after this with some of those sticky questions, unique questions. And you know, maybe this weekend you'll find yourself really trying to relax or do some yard work, but instead you might think back on today wistfully and have a really interesting question or nuance come to mind. If that does happen, please remember that we're always happy to nerd out on planning with you. So please do reach out. Okay, let's test some technological skills. We've got some good chat going on already, but I want to make sure that we're all on board. So I'm going to ask 2 questions, and I'd like you to offer up your answer in the chat. So that's that little bubble next to the people who should pull up the chat window. The first question is to get a sense of who's out there in the virtual room. Some of you have already introduced yourself. But if you would please throw into the chat what your position is. You know, I'm sure we have some staff, some planning commissioners, for example. So your name will pop up if you want to put what your position is, if you want to put where you're from. Just give us a sense of who's out there and what perspective you're coming from. You know, usually when this is in person, we get to hear how long you've been in your position and what interests you about it. So let's just get a sense of who's in the room. There we go. Got Windsor Planning Commission. Whoa, there's so many, I can't even read them. Oh, this is great. Look at everybody. There's Brighton, there's a pause, and Lyons. Okay. Wow, hello everybody. This is great. I hope you're having fun, as much fun as I am seeing everyone else who's here. Okay, yes, town administrators, commissioners, we've got a whole bunch of people here. Okay, keep putting that if you haven't put yours yet. But a second question, maybe even more fun, is that I'd really like to hear from you. What makes a good community? You know, we're all here because we're part of a community and we're part of a structure that's working to improve it. So throw in the chat, what makes a good community? You know, what motivates you to be in the position that you're in, to be here at this workshop today? What gets you up in the morning thinking, yeah, I get to work on land use? I mean, I know I feel that way. So I'm curious what you think. Oh, the people, that's wonderful. The people are a good reason to do things. Collaboration and balance, yes. Passion for quality of life and caring for each other. Oh, small town feel, but with amenities, yes. Environment, innovation, all these are great. Yeah, communications and preserving character. Public participation, totally, that's a very great reason. Future, ooh, inclusivity and equity, nice. Working with people to make our community better and sustainable development, growth management, yeah. And future, oh, these are great, you guys. Safe and healthy environment, diversity, great ideas. Yeah, there's so much, and keep throwing them in there. Other people are watching. There's so many reasons that we come to the positions that we're in, and we are so dedicated that we would join a, you know, possibly 2-hour webinar just to figure out how to do it better. So, so thanks for that. Keep throwing your ideas in there. And I'm glad that we've got a handle on the chat. So remember, any question at any time, throw it in there. If we need to dig deeper or have some questions, then we'll note your question and follow up with you afterward. So throw them in there at any time. Okay, as another logistical item, a lot of these issues that we're going to talk about today, they're designed to be introductory. So 90% of the time, what is shared will be true and what you experience, but sometimes things get complicated, especially depending on your local rules. So if you have questions, talk to staff, talk to your attorney, and know that we're always around as a backup resource too. The last large item that I'll mention is that, again, we're going to post this webinar on our website. So if you want to return to a topic or a point, you'll be able to reference all of this information there. And the last small item, which I included in tiny font, purely for your amusement, is the typical disclaimer that, you know, this is not intended to be legal advice. I am not your attorney. Andy in the chat, not your attorney. So make sure to consult with your attorney on anything specific, or if you have nitty-gritty questions on. Okay. Next, let's get into the agenda. Here's what we'll cover today. We've done welcome and introduction, so we're very, very efficient, off to a good start. And next, I'll share a bit about resources we have for you, and then move into the main substantive topics, which are why plan and planning authority, roles and responsibilities, long-range planning and implementation, effective meetings and decision-making, legal and ethical issues. We'll have scenarios throughout to make sure that we're engaging our brains. And then as an added topic to what we usually cover, we got some requests to do planning related operations during a pandemic. So I have a brief segment about that at the end. Okay. A few comments about resources that we have for you. First, DOLA planning resources. So, you know, here in the Community Development Office, we're part of DOLA, which really has a mission of technical and financial assistance. And in the Community Development Office, we focus on land use and planning assistance, also on integrating land use with other topics, water, housing, hazards. We actually, on the topic of water, have a brand new subpage. If you just Google, you know, DOLA, DLG, CDO, some kind of alphabet soup that gets you to DOLA's Community Development Office, you'll see the new subpage on integrating water and land use, as well as the other topics. We also focus on downtown revitalization assistance. That's the Main Street program. Perhaps some of you are Main Street communities or affiliates. If none of that's ringing a bell, but you want to know more, let us know and we'll get you in touch with Gail Langley, who manages that program, and you can learn more. You can even, like I mentioned, affiliates, you can even be an affiliate and just get their newsletter, updated information, get in on some of that thinking and resources just from an informational affiliate perspective. And there's the website, if that's what you'd like to follow up on, or Google works too. All right, so here is a look at that website. You can see that there's even a whole Planning Commissioner resources sub-page that has all kinds of stuff. You can see these resources listed here, you know, a primer on master plans, the 3-mile plans, which we'll talk about in a little bit, all kinds of stuff on there for you. It's a great place to start poking around. There's also planning for hazards. I put in this little blue box, planningforhazards.com is the website to look at. It's got all kinds of information about how to integrate hazards into your long-range land use planning. And if you go on that tab right next to home that says hazards, you can even search by hazard that you're interested in. So that's a great resource to check out. And you can also check out the Colorado Resiliency Office that's here in the Division of Local Government. They have all kinds of information on their website. When I took this screenshot, I hovered over the plan tab so that you can see that they have resiliency frameworks and how to integrate resilience into existing plans. So lots of good information on there. And that's coresiliency.com, as you can see in the bottom right. It's another great place to look around. And as I mentioned, Main Street. So here you can see a bunch of Main Street resources, the Main Street toolkits. And again, let us know if you want to get linked up with Gail Langley, and we'll do that. Next up, demographic resources. The State Demography Office here in DOLA has, I don't know how to describe it, maybe a mountain of information and data. Is pretty overwhelming. I get overwhelmed at least looking through all of their information online. They have a dashboard that has all kinds of stuff that you can look up, and you can generate a community profile. So when you generate this online, it can look something like what you're seeing here. And this is an example from 2017, which I didn't go and update since we're doing statewide anyway. But it's interesting, you know, you can see some of how the data is presented. You can see the little Venn diagram there showing you where people are employed versus where they're residing. So in this example, you can learn things like, you know, hey, here in Cortez, at least in 2017, you know, 7% were living in Dolores, 5% in Durango, et cetera. When you, or sorry, we're employed. When you look at where they reside, you can dig in on, you know, 19% reside in Cortez, work in Cortez, 12% work in Durango, 2.9% work in Denver. So just some interesting stuff that that you can learn about your community and put some numbers around it. So that's the State Demography Office and their mountain of data. You can also look at some statewide maps to get a sense of what's happening regionally and the bigger picture. This shows population change from 2010 to 2018. The blue colors are population loss, the warmer colors are gain. I can tell you what, if you look at the forecasting, the map is colored pretty similarly. So that's another way to get at some information on their site. And then a final plug is talking about the census. So I'll cover what we have been saying, which is, you know, remember the census, that it's important, safe, and easy. 11 questions, 10 minutes. I found it to be a little faster than that, but probably depends. It's important because it represents our political representation as well as funding. It's about $1,500 per person per year in federal funding, as well as that good data information that all of us on this workshop really care about. It's online, by phone, mail, in person as a last resort. And so we included in here, you know, if you would become familiar with it, encourage people to fill it out, and then let us know if there are questions or concerns that we can pass along to our friends in the Demography Office who are leading this effort for Colorado. You know, a couple other things. I was on their website recently and learned that the self-reporting phase that was supposed to go through July is now going through October because of COVID-19. And also field operations are beginning to get back up and running. So we may see a little more activity on the census. Okay, end of census blurb. Let's get into the feature presentation. We're going to start with why plan and planning authority. Okay, why plan? Well, a few reasons. First, it helps government be more efficient and effective. As an example, a defined process in the development code ensures fair treatment. This also ensures that you don't have to make things up as you go, which can be costly and just take a lot of time. It allows governments to seize opportunities. You know, if there's parcel of land that becomes available in some prime location near Main Street, then the city, because it had documented the vision for the community to create green space, for example, they've already got the community buy-in along the way, so the purchase of the property is able to sail through. Easier than it sounds, right? Okay, the other point is haphazard development can create eyesores or problems. You know, the picture that's featured on this slide is lighthearted, but it's a real issue that can cause serious accessibility and safety issues. Also, haphazard development can create patterns that are expensive to serve. So, you know, as a counterexample, when we're planning closely with, say, the water provider, we can make sure that the right pipes are in the right places and at the right size. So make sure everything's linking up. All right. I like to feature this quote because a lot of us get questions about, you know, hey, why spend money on planning? Well, I think this is a strong response. Here it says, who would invest in a corporation if it didn't have a business plan? And the same is true for a community. If it doesn't have a plan, you know, every successful institution, whether it's a corporation or a community, does need to plan. So I think that's a pretty compelling response. Okay, let's talk law. The authority to plan and our grounding authority. To fully understand how planning in Colorado works, we have to establish the legal context, which means recognizing the government's police power. So police power means the rights of government to establish laws and ordinances to preserve public order and tranquility and to promote public health, safety, and general welfare. So from our federal constitution, police power is reserved to the states and granted to local governments through statute. Now in Colorado, we're a local control state, which means the state has granted broad land use authority to local governments. There are very few requirements, but lots of enabling authority, and communities are free to create solutions that work for them. The Colorado revised statutes authorize municipalities and counties to appoint planning commissions to prepare comprehensive plans for the physical development of the jurisdiction and to regulate the use of land according to several topics, you know, hazards, roads, other infrastructure, wildlife, and much more. Okay, beyond the statutes, home rule charters give municipalities even more authority and flexibility. So if you're a planning commissioner in a home rule community, make sure you're familiar with your municipality's charter as well. Oops, whoa. Bear with me, thank you. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about statutory authority. The requirement is that regulations must be tied to a valid public purpose, that's substantive due process, and be enacted and implemented so those directly affected have a meaningful opportunity to participate. That's procedural due process. So you're guarding the substance and you're guarding the process. Now, as we covered, there are a few requirements, very few, but a few, so here they are. The first one is master plans for local governments that meet the statutory criteria for population and growth rate. So communities of 100,000 or more, or a community of 10,000 or more that grows by 10% or more in any year. And that's, you can reference the statutes listed here. Or maybe rewind this webinar and listen to that mouthful again. The other one is subdivision regulations for counties. Those can be found in statute, and if you're interested in more detail, but essentially you'll find things like, you know, what must be submitted by subdividers or to the Board of County Commissioners, requirements around evidence necessary, easements, adequate water supply, things like that. The third one here is 3-mile plans. We'll get into 3-mile plans a little bit later as well. And there's a whole fact sheet on the Community Development Office website. But the short version is that municipalities cannot annex more than 3 miles beyond their current boundary. And so before a municipality adopts an annexation ordinance within the 3 mile area, it must have a 3 mile plan at least 1 year in advance. So that's a long range planning activity that contemplates where to annex, how services will be provided, and how it will ensure consistent use with the surrounding areas. So that's the basics on a 3 mile plan. Although the last thought is that some communities do sufficiently cover that 3 mile area outside of their boundary in their comprehensive plan. And if they do that sufficiently, then there doesn't need to be a separate plan. So that's the long and short of 3 mile plans, I suppose. Okay, and just to keep your, wait, actually, no, before that, something new for you. New House Bill 20-1095 that was very, very recently signed is, I'll say, a requirement around water in comprehensive plans. And so this new requirement is that if you include water in a comprehensive plan, then you must include water conservation. So it's, I don't know, a requirement light or some sort of squishy middle of something new. And then I suppose finally, I'll mention that just to keep your brain engaged, this picture at the bottom is a picture of a park plan, which is not part of statutorily required planning. So good catch if you noticed that. And if not, that's fine, because I only included it because I've been missing parks lately. And that's the long and short of that. Okay, let's move on now into roles and responsibilities. So we covered wide plan and planning authority, and now we'll talk about roles within that structure. Here's a short list of people involved in your planning processes. You know, we're going to cover in detail these elected officials, planning commission staff, citizens, and applicants. But I'm sure also that some of you in the audience today fit into a couple of these buckets at one time or another. That's often the case. So you probably bring in different perspectives. If you have thoughts, always throw them in the chat. We'll plug for that. But in the meantime, let's go through these one by one. Elected officials. Generally, elected officials are going to make policy and legislate. They'll use enabling authority in the charter to protect public interest, hire staff and appoint boards to further the mission, provide general direction and ongoing two-way communication. In general, elected officials provide direction, provide communication, but don't micromanage. Next, Planning Commission. Okay, so the Planning Commission is the voice of the community on land use. It's an advisory to the elected board, prepare, master a comprehensive plan, apply current policy and regulations. We're feeling like a judge. Provide planning and land use expertise, review development applications, adopt and consistently use bylaws, and regularly assess planning policies and regulations. So, sounds like such a clean, simple list, but it's more complicated than that, isn't it? All right, let's talk about staff. Staff and consultants provide technical expertise and guidance, information and training. They assist with research and provide information. They do the staff report, they notice meetings and communicate with applicants. They ensure good communication and offer professional opinions. So staff, including the clerk, planner, administrator, attorney, they're your go-to people. And now coming from stories that have popped up from time to time across the state, across the country, an important key to think about is to make sure to avoid scapegoating or bad-mouthing of staff in a public meeting or public hearing. That has come up from time to time in places, so I'll keep that in mind. And citizens. The role of citizens is to participate fully, advise appointed and elected officials, to ask questions and offer input and solutions. And I don't know, disclaimer about this picture, I was just searching for citizens and apparently there's a movie with that title, and I thought this was a good picture because it has a camcorder, and we might all be thinking about this, yes, now that we have recording devices that have proliferated across everyone's hands, that's part of the picture as well. So for what it's worth, there's that to represent citizens too. Okay, let's move on to the applicant. The applicant's role is to learn and respect the adopted rules and processes, to expect fair and predictable process, not work the system, to communicate issues and concerns, to have realistic expectations and an understanding of the role of government. So, some other things here, no late materials or last minute changes, no ex parte contacts, which we'll get into during the legal and ethical segment of today. And to understand that following the adopted process and complying with policies and regs, that means an applicant's project will likely have more community support. It's a good thing to keep in mind too. Oh, I saw the chat. It looks like some of these points are resonating. Thanks for having good discussion in the chat. There's nothing like peer learning, so thanks for doing that. All right. So as we're thinking about everyone's roles, particularly if you're a planning commissioner, the idea is to slow down and reflect together. I don't know if any of you have been here in this kind of picture. I've certainly seen that. Unfortunate. So slow down and reflect together. What isn't working well? Where are we seeing issues emerge or trends? Maybe that means we need to change a process. And are we having regular retreats with the elected board to get on the same page? Maybe here at the bottom, make recommendations to the elected board for changes to policies, regulations, or standards based on the trends and issues that you're seeing. That way you can have a good, robust, defined process that is really meeting the issues that are coming up. Okay, now we're going to hit our first scenario question as promised. Since we're not in person, I'm going to handle it a little differently. I'll read the question and then pause to allow some thinking and for you to put answers in the chat. I'll give some sample answer for you too. And feel free in the chat to respond to each other and build on each other's ideas. I see people are saying, hey, me too, for some of your experiences. So here's our first question to get our brains going. This is a planning commission makes a unanimous decision, but the city council or town board overturns it, which in fact happens often. What actions could the planning commission take to address their concern about being overturned? So go ahead and throw in the chat what you think. What actions might they take? Or might you take? Workshop with the board, maybe appeal the decision. Yeah, a lot of this is going to turn on the rules you have in place. Other thoughts? People are out there thinking furiously and typing as well. Since they're appointed, talk to the board or council. Yeah, another workshop, check in with them. Could speak to them at a meeting. Got lots of ideas here. Ask for a meeting with them. Yeah, like you're really hitting on that point from the previous slide about we need to make sure that we're checking in and getting on the same page, having regular retreats. Oh, look, here the answers are flying in. Okay, so keep looking at what people are saying. And I'll add that you can also review your record to ensure that your findings of fact state how the standards have been met. So for instance, make sure that your record shows that, maybe there was notice given, that it conforms to the comprehensive plan elements, that it meets the standards of the land development code, so that you're showing that your decision was not based on opinion. You had a very defensible record there. Yeah, review rules and process. Yeah, you guys are coming up with some good ideas. Okay, so for fun, as you're thinking through this first scenario question, because yes, I do think this is fun, we're going to talk about land use law. A great case to know about is Krupp versus Breckenridge Sanitation District. And to summarize, that held that, when reviewing a decision that was made by a governmental body, the district court is going to affirm the decision unless that governmental entity abused its discretion or exceeded its jurisdiction. So that review that the trial court is going to do is going to be based on the record that was before the governmental entity, based solely on that. And the decision that that governmental entity made must be affirmed unless there's no competent evidence in the record to support it. So basically, the decision of the governmental entity will be affirmed unless the decision was arbitrary or capricious. So that means the best way to protect yourself and your decision is to make sure your record is clear, thorough, and based on the standards in your planning documents, like the comp plan, like the code, and that you've spelled that out. Okay. Let's do another In this one, a local developer brings updated plans to the staff the day before the hearing. I'm sure this has happened to a few of you out there. Do you allow the applicant to make last-minute changes? That could be one question you answer. Or if you do, how do you ensure staff and the board will have enough time to review the information? Ooh, we're getting quick no's. Yes. Yeah, in fact, delaying when there's new information, that's a good move. Yes, a continuance, there it is. Staff will recommend a continuance. Right, okay. So, another thought that has come up from time to time is that some also have a referral process in place. So if you're a commission with that, then you might consider that the agencies to which you referred would not have an opportunity to review and comment on the new information. It's another issue that can come up. Lots of good ideas in here. Okay, nice. You guys are chat masters. All right, so there's an introduction to our scenarios, and we will have many more, I promise. There's a lengthy segment that's a lot of fun that's coming up. Okay, but first let's talk about long-range planning and implementation. Planning tools. All right, here's a list of some big planning tools. First, the master or comprehensive plan. This is your vision, your guide to the future, but you implement that vision by adopting regulations and other means. You have the 3 mile plan, which we talked about earlier. The only other thing that I'll mention here is that with a 3 mile plan, it's important to communicate carefully. We've been hearing about an uptick in misunderstanding about the 3 mile plan. Some residents think that it's an official zoning change or another more formal move. So if you're planning to create or update a 3 mile plan, make sure to spend some extra time thinking about your communications strategy and get out ahead of that. Okay, other things, intergovernmental agreements, IGAs, increasingly popular to manage regional issues, plan unit developments. These I've heard mixed reactions to. Some people think that they're a symptom of a broken zoning code. Others think they're a great opportunity to do some upfront negotiations with developers. To each their own thought. I think it really depends on what's going on. I would have a lot of questions for anyone before answering on either side of that debate, but that's another thing to know about plan unit developments. Areas of state interest, this is where you can include local permitting process over certain areas or activities. It often comes up in the context of oil and gas. And there's a lot of information on the CDO, the Community Development Office, on our website to dig further into this topic. Subdivision regulations, zoning, building codes, a little more straightforward bread and butter. And then finally, incentives and programs. And here I'll pause to comment to make sure to think about the intended and unintended incentives of things like tap fees, review process differences. No comment on which way to go. It's just good to think about how that's going. Ask yourself some good reflective questions about what some of the consequences are, both intended and not. Is it working like you hoped? Okay, so there's the overview. Let's dig in on a couple of these. First, the master or comprehensive plan. So it's the community's vision and their roadmap. It's an advisory document here in Colorado. Although you note it can be mandatory, but it's an advisory document. It is important to go through the process as a community before you get to the implementation tools. If the plan was regulatory, it might be more difficult, less effective as a planning tool, because you might be limited, you might limit your vision based on what you think about the regulations you have. So essentially you could skip step. Visioning is an important exercise, and once the plan is finished, then you can worry about implementing it. Another thought is that if it's too much to develop a comp plan at once or to update it all at once, consider adopting it by region or by part or element, and then review and update one piece each year so you don't have to overhaul it as frequently. Okay, more on that. More on plan elements. Here are the standard plan elements. You'll notice some of them jump out at you and you're familiar with them. And you'll also notice that there's one here in red. Recreation and tourism is the only required plan element. As we discussed earlier, there's been a change regarding the water element. I didn't put it separate or in red because the change again is that if you do include a water element, then you must include water conservation. So still squishy. I'm not ready to put it in red. Maybe orange. That's not easy to see. Maybe not. Okay, let's move on. Comp plan. It provides guidance for zone change requests, land use code incentives, annexation requests, decisions about expansion of major infrastructure, and decisions about the location of new infrastructure. So a lot of visioning going on in that document. And here are some other long-range plans. So the comprehensive plan is intended to provide the framework to guide physical development now and in the future. It helps give that balance between natural and built environment. Other examples here are also long-range plans, and they're intended to help shape the community and to protect things that the community values long into the future. With long-range plans, the public process is crucial to the success of the plan. It helps to build a shared vision and establish trust between government and its citizens. And the final point down here in red is that integration is key. If a community has 10 long-range plans that compete with each other or don't provide clear direction, then it'll take longer to achieve the community's overall vision. That's time and funding implications as well. All right, a couple comments now on cooperative planning. Okay, so first off, CRS is the Colorado Revised Statute. There's a section in there, 2920-105 through 107. For those of you, the statutory wonks who are interested, that authorizes and encourages local governments to cooperate or contract with other units of government for purposes of planning or regulating the development of land. So these are mutually binding and enforceable plans or regional planning commissions or for revenue sharing. So cooperative planning is a key subject to spend a minute on because planning issues are complex, they're interrelated. Planning issues and growth impacts, they do not respect political boundaries and applicants will shop for the best deal. So it's good to have the relationship already structured out. Incompatible standards do make for rough transitions and cooperative planning does provide for using tax dollars more efficiently. So a good topic to spend some time thinking about. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about trends and key issues. Here are some things that we've been seeing bubble up to the top in the recent couple of years, for some of them longer. You'll be the judge of that. They are these. So first, plan for an aging demographic for public health and livability. Integrate hazards into development decision-making, resilient policies, and consider mitigating and adapting to the effects of climate change. So here's those resource websites I pointed out, Planning for Hazards or the CRO's website, the Colorado Resilience Office website. Those have so much information and tools for that bullet. Next, plan for protecting and ensuring sufficient water supply and quality. Create opportunities for affordable housing. Strategize toward economic diversification, so that's some fiscal resiliency, and then also consider social equity. All right, those are trends. I'm sorry for the picture. I hope wildfire is not a trend. It's unfortunate, but important to think about. And the idea here is, we want to make sure that we're using our tools well, because truthfully, we don't want to be in either one of these airplanes, but if we want to be in one more than the other, probably the one where the pilots might be looking at where they're going. Maybe they've got a shot. I don't know. I'm sure this is moving fast. But this is what we're trying to avoid. Okay. All right. Let's go into the next segment here. The next piece we're going to talk about is meetings and decision making. So we've done why planning authority, we've talked about tools. But now we're going to move into what does it look like when we're together trying to make decisions based on all these tools. Okay, and this is from the cover of Governing Magazine some years ago. And the question is, do your meetings look like this? A little, I don't know, very maybe formal, a little intimidating possibly, or do they look like this? That can happen from time to time. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, yes, sometimes meetings can look like this. So the question is, how do we have better meetings? That's the goal. So let's set the stage with the types of action. There are two big actions to think about, and those are legislative and quasi-judicial. So legislative is when you're dealing with public policy. So it's the sort of broad sweeping action. You're going to feel more like you're trying to do a bunch of research, create, craft some good public policy. And quasi-judicial is when you're going to determine the rights or obligations of an individual. So it's when you're taking the rules that are in place and applying them to a particular person, parcel, etc. So those are the two main pieces. And why this is important is that the goal here is to protect, like we talked about, there's substantive due process and procedural due process. So this is critical because we're protecting the due process of individuals in our community. If you're acting in a quasi-judicial role, you might think differently to ensure due process is given, so that there's adequate notice so they can participate and have a fair process, meaning impartial decision making, hearing the evidence that it's presented in front of everyone. So really making sure that process is protected is key. All right, we're going to dig in on these a little bit more. Public meetings. So when you're wearing your legislative hat, you're going to be seeking input, and you're going to try to make sure that there's inclusive participation, explain the context and the big picture, explain the process and the timeline to set those expectations, demonstrate active listening that really helps things go well, limit jargon and acronyms, and that's actually a due process point, making sure that the information is accessible to everyone. Help make it relevant, really drive it home, act as a community ambassador. I mean, you're in the role you're in and you clearly care about the community, so that's probably not much of a leap. And then remaining courteous no matter what. So basically all this put together is that, you're setting the right tone, making sure there are agendas of the room set up, requesting testimony, listening well, actively listening. You're not going to be afraid to say, I don't know, if you need to. And then the last thing here is a picture that I included, which is, watch out for the party crasher. And that's someone who wants to get you to say something that will get you in trouble or make a great headline. So do keep an eye out for that. Yeah. All right, now let's talk a little bit more about public hearings. So this is your quasi-judicial role. This is when you have your judge hat on and you're very concerned about due process protections. A couple of key things to do here, more than a couple, to be fair. Announce the rules in advance and enforce them consistently. Remain unbiased while you're hearing evidence and show you're listening, just like with the legislative hat. It's always good to be listening. It's important to have a strong chair and a supportive board, so stay on task and avoid tangents. And we'll be talking more about a strong chair in a moment. Input only during noticed public hearings. We'll talk about ex parte contacts in a moment. Ask questions. Does this application meet your standards? And make careful motions. So public hearings basically are a different beast. There are well-defined rules and procedures. The chair needs to direct the hearing and be supportive of the commission. And when reviewing a particular application, for instance, it's important to frame each issue as it's being discussed. So, if you're trying to get to the bottom of the lighting proposed for a particular development, make sure to finish that conversation before you move on to landscaping, setbacks, etc. This will make it easy for you and for the public, and for someone reading the record later. Okay, decision making. Okay, making decisions. So this should be the fun part of your job, but it's definitely challenging, and it's important to be prepared, read the materials, and ask the right questions. So make sure to give yourself that chance to prepare once you're done. So the keys here are that everyone, a good meeting means everyone had meaningful opportunity to participate. People feel they were heard. The issues were relevant, they're related to the standards, and relevant issues were addressed. There were no long tangents or discussions that were off topic. The commission's decision was clear and was reasonably defensible. Okay. So those are a few thoughts there on decision making. Now let's take a few slides to talk more about the chair in particular. What makes a strong chair? A strong chair really is going to help make the meeting effective. So they're going to be a great communicator. They'll set the tone and ensure civility. A strong listener, a timekeeper, and an enforcer. Yeah, so those are the headline comments, but a couple more thoughts. It's kind of an interesting way to think about the chairs as the air traffic controller. So they're going to be focused on the next plane, not each plane in the moment, moving things along. Okay, yeah, that's what we're talking about, but what's the next step? Are we on time? That kind of a thing. So keeping an eye on what's coming next and on the whole process. More on the chair, they're the timekeeper, enforcer, and they're ensuring no dead air. And that's a good point because silences are a great place where people want to jump in. If there's someone who's inclined to disruption, that's where they're going to do it. So a strong chair will be making sure that there's no dead air, as soon as the comments are done, moving on to the next thing, keeping it moving. A couple tips here using cues. For example, if a meeting's really dragging on, hey, we're on item 2 and it is 9 p.m. It's a little hint. And then make sure to back up the chair to help with consistent enforcement of the rules. That's another tone setting kind of thing. Okay. A few comments about improving meetings. Some tips are to set the right tone, that it's civil and professional. Provide information on procedures, especially up front, set the ground rules right away and follow them. Thank people for their testimony. That sounds so simple, but we hear over and over that it goes a long way towards keeping people calm. Watch nonverbal cues. I know that's harder when we're doing things virtually, but when we're in person, watch nonverbal cues and show extraordinary patience. So setting the tone for patience is key too. Okay. Let's talk about decision-making, common hurdles and mistakes. So we talked about what happens when it goes right. Now let's talk about issues that can come up. So common hurdles with decision-making processes are, not being prepared, not asking enough questions. So remember, we're wanting to really develop those records. Asking for a vote of the audience is probably not following the process. And also a question that comes to my mind is, what does that get you? So I don't know. I digress on that point. Showing bias before a decision is made and attempting to be the architect or the applicant. So those are common hurdles that can come up. All right, avoid let's make a deal. This is so big, it gets its own slide. So the key to focus on here is, does the project meet your standards or does it not? It's really key to remember that it's the process that protects you, and that, if you're going to be doing some, design from the podium that can invite some problems, it can invite a need to relaunch the process, it can, invite legal challenge, it's best to just don't play this game show. It's probably the best advice that I can give. All right, a few more common hurdles. Avoid showing bias and consider your intent. And then, this third bullet is so important that it is the reason for all of the graphics on this page. Think of the front page newspaper test, which is, of course, if what you said was flashed across the front page, would you feel good about it? Do not use social media to argue, condemn, attack, or even set the record straight. You've got your record from the meeting that was open to everybody. That's what will be relied upon should there be any challenge. And consider that doing these kinds of discussions outside of that kind of a meeting can lead you to certain vulnerabilities. So it's really best to not even engage. Let the record speak for itself, and make sure that all of your thinking and decision making is clear on the record in that venue where everyone had access. Another point, leave it to staff. That has to do with communications where people are confused, need information, that kind of stuff. Staff is your friend. And then establish and discuss often the social media policy. So if you don't have one, it's a great thing to put in place, just so that everyone's working from the same playbook, and it's on the same page. Okay. Now let's talk about defensible procedures. For defensible procedures, remember that consistency is key. You need to be treating each application the same and applying the same rules during your hearings. It's important to make sure that your records are kept organized and documented accurately, as well as how decisions were made. So for example, if a city were to be challenged in court, these are the things that they'll be looking for: accurate records and findings based on facts. So to have defensible procedures here, make sure that you cover these bases: notice, an opportunity to be heard, clear rules, that you followed your process and your rules, findings of fact, unbiased and timely decisions, and complete records. So those are the keys. All right, motions. Well-prepared motions take some effort, and they can be tough to keep consistent. Your procedures for motions should be agreed upon prior to the public hearings. It's a good idea to switch it up from time to time as well. You might let those who are less comfortable speaking in public practice making a motion outside of the hearing so they can become more confident that you can switch it up. Make sure that your motions speak to findings of fact, not opinions. And whether you start with a motion and then have discussion, or discuss and then make a motion, whichever way you handle it, keep the discussion focused on whether or not the application meets your standards, because deliberation communicates how the decision is made to staff, to the applicant, and to the audience as well. And take turns. Final thought, final answer. Okay, here's some thoughts on avoiding getting tripped up. Avoiding getting tripped up before voting as one complex motion, you can vote on conditions one at a time. That can help provide some focus and clarity. Move to approve for the reasons listed in the staff report. So that's a really nice tip, because it includes the staff report in your findings. That's a nice, slick way to do it. And now let's talk a little bit about findings of fact, and then we're going to have some fun with scenarios. So here are a couple more thoughts to get us primed for those scenario questions. Findings of fact. These are your factual foundations for your conclusions as to whether your standards are met. They're your legal footprints, your breadcrumbs. Facts must address the standards, ask questions designed to get the evidence related to the standards, and adopt processes, and follow your adopted processes. Findings of fact, they'll conform with the comp plan, and make sure that you're not making a decision based on opinion or your gut feeling. These are going to, again, state how the standards have been met. For instance, public notice was given, it conforms with the comp plan, it meets the standards of the land development code. That'll show that it's not based on opinion. And remember the court case we discussed earlier, Krupp versus Breckenridge Sanitation, the court will review the record that was before the governmental entity. So make sure your decisions are clear and tied to the information presented, as well as your review standards. So strong record means protection for you is the tagline of this segment. And okay, so now we're going to go through a series of scenarios. Oops, no, we're not. We're going to talk about final tips. Sorry about that. You have to wait one more slide. Okay, hopefully just one. Final tips to read you through here. So detailed deliberation, it informs better emotions, it informs the community as well as the judge, like we just talked about how the decision was made. Also avoid vague or non-specific motions. Ask yourself, would someone understand a few years later why the decision was made or what was decided? Sometimes things can get vague. Watch for bias against difficult people. That one's tough, but make sure to look for legitimate points and solutions. And don't be afraid to say, I don't know. That's really important. We can always, look things up later. It's fine not to know things. We can't be an expert all the time. And you don't need to explain or apologize for the process, like to a minority voter or about a minority voter. You have your process and you're following it. That's what you got to do. That's how you protect yourself and protect everyone. Everyone deserves to expect the same process. And know that if they don't like the outcome, they're likely to attack the process. So again, you could get caught up in, ooh, I really don't like this proposal, or a lot of people really don't like this proposal. And so you might want to make a move that doesn't follow your process. Well, if the outcome comes out in a way that someone doesn't like, they'll attack by attacking the process. So those are your safety rules. And remember that a popular decision is not always good, and a good one not always popular. So again, it's your responsibility to protect current and future public health, safety, and welfare. Even if it's not popular in the moment, that's the sometimes tough job that we're in. Okay. Now, as promised, decision-making scenarios. So I've got a series of scenarios here so that we can perk our brains back up. I've been monologuing at you a lot, and there's a lot of information. So let's really pull on some of our experiences. I've been seeing the chat scroll up, so I know you guys are engaged in giving comments. Thank you for that. So let's get a little targeted here and say some responses to several scenarios. How about that? Okay, so here's the first one. An unpopular development application would likely go over a lot better if they had a better design. You decide to impose a condition of approval, a design standard that the town has not adopted because it'll calm opponents and make it a better project, trying to ease the process. What's a possible outcome of this? Whoa, I apologize, but there was a quick answer about lawyers. Yes, everyone's picking up on that. Unfair to previous applicants or decision. Other thoughts? The developer could agree to such condition, but otherwise lawyers. Yes. Yeah, you're all picking up on this. It could be challenged. That's exactly right. A+, everybody. Okay, let's move on then and do another one. Yeah, make it a recommendation. There you go. So trying to avoid the challenge. Okay, let's do another one. Citizen at the hearing wants to take a vote of the audience. Oh, I remember mentioning that earlier. What's a possible outcome of that? Or what approaches could you take to avoid that kind of outburst? Thoughts on that? Someone wants to vote. Lose meeting control. Oh yes, riot. Oh no. It's not binding. Yeah, it's not following the process. Pitchforks. Pitchforks and fire, right? The chair needs to quash this idea. And, oh, it's moving so quickly. You all had so many thoughts. But yeah, a strong chair. We talked about that. A good chair will have control. And you probably talked about the expectations at the outset. So that might be an approach you could take, is saying them at the outset and then reminding people of them. Use the opportunity to educate on due process. That's a great point. Yeah, it's important. And there's really nothing like in the moment learning, is there? Yes, don't be an applause meter. That's funny. You guys have good thoughts and experiences and some humor as well. I think that's important when you're facing pitchforks, isn't it? Yes, must be part of the public comment period, otherwise no comments. Yeah, you guys are picking up on a lot of good pieces of this puzzle. Okay, so vote of the audience, no good. Let's do another one in this series. Oh, look, yes, you mentioned pitchforks, here they are. Okay, here's another one. A citizen in the audience wants to question the applicant. Is this acceptable? And what are possible outcomes of this? Has this happened to anyone? I'm going to assume there are a bunch of heads nodding out there. Throw your thoughts in the chat. Is it acceptable? What might happen? Happens all the time. Comment has to be opened. Yes, who's running the meeting anyway? Cage fight, oh wow. Yes, yeah, great. You guys are picking up on this. It's all about following that process. Questions addressed to the board. Yeah, so follow the process. So, you know, go in the public comment period, the allotted time. Yes, can post a question. That's right. Yeah, you guys are nailing this. So another one that is not so good, but our process is what we'll return to. Okay, next. Opponent of a project challenges the time limit, demanding the full time she needs to provide her testimony. You know, what do you think of that? What's a possible outcome? And boy, isn't that kind of compelling? Like, hey, this is a complicated issue. Hear me out. Let me tell you everything. If only you heard all this information, then you'd understand. You know, if someone says that to you, what do you think of that? Does that happen? What are possible outcomes? I think you're going to nail this one too. We don't have thoughts yet, but I would say, again, this is not following the process. They could submit comments ahead of time in writing. Time limit, get to the point during the 3 minutes. The chair needs to make it stop. Yep, we're hitting on the strong chair again. Follow the process for every person speaking, being fair. People do ignore time limits. Yeah, that is tough. And the meeting would go forever. And who wants to, be there until midnight? Oh my goodness. Set the tone at the beginning of the meeting. Be flex. Yeah, sometimes you can be flexible depending on the scenario. That's good. You were thinking pretty deeply about this. Okay. Oh, and someone's let one speaker on behalf of several citizens have longer time. That's an interesting approach. Thank you for sharing all these. Oh, we've had members cede their time. Yes, an out of control meeting. That's a great point. That I've heard that in other instances as well. And that can be a problem. And I would say, return to how your rules are written, make sure that it's clear that each person gets the allotted time and then enforce that. Okay. Oh, this is so good. Keep watching what people are saying. There's so much going on. Let's do another one because we've got a whole series here. The chair has asked people not to repeat testimony, but someone is saying pretty much the same thing as the last guy. So what are possible approaches to stop this? We all agree that that's something we should stop, right? So how might we stop that? And what are pros and cons of cutting them off? So this happens relatively often too. So as you're thinking about this, someone's repeating the testimony, what do you do? How do you get that to stop? Let them go for the 3 minutes, but mention that they're repeating. Yeah, that's a nice, gentle way to do it. So they get their time, but we're reminding them that, hey, that's already on the record. We hear it. Audience, remind them not to restate. I've heard chairs say, do you have anything new? Oh, that's a good tip. Chair reminds people. Oh, so ideas are flying in. Con, claim the First Amendment rights are violated. And you'll want to return to your process. Maybe that comment about giving them the 3 minutes and then reminding them how the process works, that it's on the record, would soothe that to some extent. Yeah, feel free to say you agree with the prior comment. Do you have anything additional not yet said? That's good too. Then they can, have their say, but it's brief. Yeah, lots of ideas here. Okay. Good thoughts, everybody. All right, let's do another one. Someone testifies and argues your point or contradicts you. Oh, how dare they? Do you engage in a debate to ensure the correct point is heard? What do you think of this one? Oh, there's a quick no. Yeah, no, no, nope. That's okay. Unprofessional, public hearing, not a debate. That's funny and true. Try not to be honest. Okay, yeah, you're getting it. You want to keep it polite, and you're on the record already, so you have that too. Okay, very good. Now here's this one. It becomes clear that a planning commission must deny the project. The applicant feels that he has not been treated fairly and implies he may sue if his project is not approved. How do you ensure your decision is defensible? Thoughts on this one? How do we make a defensible decision? Cite the code, process, back it up with the code. Yep. Findings, findings, findings. Location, location, location. Look at the record. Yes. Very clear motions. Nice. Yeah. Make sure you make careful motions that state why the decision was made, tie it to all those things others have been commenting about. That your questioning was robust. That's another way to do it. Tying it to all the standards. Yes. Great. Good. Well done. Okay. Let's see if I can stump you. I don't think I can. That's not the point anyway, but let's see. The applicant claims the Planning Commission's decision has essentially removed the highest and best use of her property. Ooh, I would wager we've all heard this. Is this a reasonable expectation is the question. Ooh, yeah. Thanks for bringing that comment that Carol added, Andy. Balancing time-efficient meetings with allowing people to be heard for those who are reviewing themselves. That's a great, nice point. Okay, so this person saying, hey, you've removed the highest and best use of my property. What gives? Is this a reasonable expectation? Sounds like a lawsuit. Well, that's what this person's implying, right? They're saying, ooh, you made a move, I'm gonna sue you. It's really what's between those lines. Let's see, here's one. No, it's our job to ensure they make the profit they want. There may be other uses allowed. There we go. This one says, no, you cannot take away all value from the property. That's suitable for it. Yes, okay, you're starting to get at it. So the highest and best use is not a reasonable expectation. What they're trying to say here is, hey, we're going to sue you for takings. And takings is when you've removed all economic beneficial use of a property, when a government action has done that. What they're trying to say is there's a partial takings. So one community, there's a mountain community I was talking with, and they said, you know what we do is we tell people a cabin is still an economically beneficial use. And what they mean by that is in their context, they have a lot of people who have bought land where they wanted to go up and build their retirement home. And once they realized they couldn't do that right next to the little creek or whatever, then they're upset that they couldn't build the kind of home they could really live in. It would really just be a weekend kind of thing. And so their response in their scenario, in their context, is a cabin is still a beneficial use. So there's the point for you. It's not reasonable to expect the highest and best use of a property is, that's subjective, and it's really not the point anyway. So to your comments in the chat, yep, stick to your process, stick to the code, and it's always anxiety provoking when people try and threaten a lawsuit. So check in with your attorney. There's another plug for that. To get your speaking points in a row, but those are some thoughts about this kind of scenario. Okay, nice work. That was a lot of fun. I hope you agree. So Let's talk about another topic, legal and ethical issues. We're gonna move on and dig in on these. And as we do, we're gonna set the tone again with remembering that there are two types of actions, the legislative and the quasi-judicial that we've been touching on. But how do you know the difference? Well, it's really if you're feeling like a legislator, if you're feeling like a judge. So here's a chart with some examples. If you're more of a visual chart kind of person, this slide is for you. Here are the functions and whether it's legislative or quasi-judicial. So you might consider that when you're working on a master plan or other general or specific plans, that's legislative, covering a broad area, a broad swath of people. Comprehensive zoning is also legislative, as well as zoning text amendments. And then here at piecemeal rezonings, those can get a little gray. It sort of depends on what you're doing, whether it's legislative or quasi-judicial. And then firmly in the quasi-judicial are going to be special exceptions and variances, conditional use permits, subdivision approvals, and zoning or use permit issuance and violations. So that is very clearly quasi-judicial stuff there. Okay. Now, thinking about a question, I guess I'll pause here and say that it's hard. I'm not sure how to answer about the regularity, but you know, many planning commissioners will that I know have expressed a deep appreciation for having their town attorney present at the meetings to sort of step in and be able to keep an eye on how the process is moving. So consider that. I'm not sure how to answer with which level of regularity, but it's a strong move to do. Okay. Now let's talk about ex parte contacts. This is a big topic for legal and ethical issues. So an ex parte contact is going to be any written or verbal communication that's initiated outside of a regularly noticed public hearing between an official with decision-making authority and one or more of the parties, but not all the parties, about a subject that is under or about to be under consideration by that official, and that seeks to influence or even just present information about the subject. So it's kind of a mouthful, but we'll dig in on it more. So here's another piece to consider. To preserve public confidence and due process, the board or commission should ensure the public and interested parties have the opportunity to know and respond to all information. So remember, this is that due process protection. The board should also ensure that each board member has the opportunity to know and consider information available to other board members. So this is important. The record of proceedings consists only of the matters presented at the hearing, not anything before or after the hearing. So therefore, to have a defensible record, only evidence presented during the hearing on the record of the hearing may be relied upon in reaching the body's decision. So what do you do? This happens a lot, right? What do you do if someone attempts an ex parte contact with you before a hearing? So here's some advice. Stop the person however you can in a way that's comfortable to you. Explain why the contact is inappropriate, like someone mentioned in the chat about one of the scenario questions. You know, use the opportunity to share information about processes. You know, next, this is sort of when you get back, disclose the contact to staff and at the meeting, at the relevant meeting. Recuse yourself and leave the room. And this, I'm going to say, is going to depend on the severity of the contact, as well as your own procedure for that. And to that point, consider adopting formal procedures. It's always so much less awkward to just have the procedure in place and follow it. And perhaps a pretty conservative procedure, because when you're, you know, much like when you're making decisions about an applicant, if you're adjusting it on the fly, trying to tailor it to what is this situation that's come up that you could never have anticipated, it can get pretty awkward. So best to have a formal procedure in place and just use it every time. Okay, here is a nice example, or a couple of examples. Here's the first one. You can put something on your web page, it's a disclaimer about ex parte contacts, and that way, if you're approached, you can say, hey, gotta stop you, here's what's going on, and you can look at the website, or maybe they'll have already seen it on that bright shining day before they would even attempt to reach out to you. So this is a nice way to get some information out there. Another approach, because as you might have noticed on that slide, it said if an application's going to be, is under review or is about to be under review. Maybe you picked up on that piece of that lengthy sentence. Well, how do you know when an application is received and you can no longer discuss it until the public hearing? One thing that Littleton does is they have an email that goes out from staff that as soon as the application is received, it goes out to everybody, and then it of course has that timestamp because it's an email, and that it's under review. Now, as far as getting into the under review versus about to be under review, that gets a little squishy, and you'll need to talk to your attorney because they rightly interpret it a little differently depending who you're talking to. So follow their advice. That's the best thing that you can do. Yes, for these quasi-judicial questions. Okay. All right. Let's do one scenario question to think about which hat you're wearing.
Oh my. And
keep an eye on the chat. People have some good ideas about ways that they've handled things. Very nice chat today, guys. I wish I could focus on that. It's driving me kind of nuts. Okay, but let's do this ethical scenario. You're on a site visit before the hearing. The owner or rep meets you just to let you in and does not talk with you, but does shadow you. You notice a couple of neighbors watching from their properties. And then I guess there's this more elevated one of you're on a site visit and one of the neighbors voices some concerns. So what do you do? Put this in the chat. How do you handle this? And to Matt's question, that's where you're going to want to talk to your attorney because they'll rightly interpret it differently. When something's under review. Disclose at the meeting for the scenario question. Yeah, may not look good. Yes, it certainly doesn't look good. And we do want to watch out for the appearance of impropriety as well. Not all planning commissions allow this. Yeah, because what this is doing is it's getting information outside of that hearing. I mean, boy, it's hard to think about the land use decision without knowing the land. But these are some good thoughts about disclosing that this happened. Absolutely going to want to do that. Explain they'll need to speak at the public during the public comment. Yes. Someone's attorney discourages it. Yes. Disclose. Absolutely. Getting some good thoughts here. Okay. So just to restate that a little bit, we want to make sure that that everyone has access to the same information. And it's hard to make a decision about land without seeing it. But this does present a problem of, the appearance of ex parte, and then in the second one, absolutely ex parte. So very good point about disclosing and following that process. Okay. Whoops. So let's do a little bit more in the chat. Do you have any other ideas or tips? I mean, we've run into this. So what have you done to help manage ex parte? Any ideas come to mind? Does anyone allow drive-bys? Sometimes that's a way that you can see a site without inviting some of that contact. stay out of the produce aisle. Safe way. Tell them to attend the meetings. Yes to drive-bys. Discourage drive-bys. Yeah, so that can be handled differently. Check in with your requirements. Check in with your attorney. Yeah, different attorneys over the years with different opinions, and you'll want to follow the most recent legal advice that you're getting. That's how you protect yourself. Some towns are so small you're always driving by everything. Yes. So, you know, in that case, think about it. It's probably best to think about how you're communicating and disclosing, and, you know, making sure that you're being and seeming above board. Organized visits with a posted agenda so that everyone gets the same information. Yeah, that's one way to handle it. Okay, wow, lots of ideas. Okay, and again, like some of you are pointing to, check in with your attorney and follow their advice. That's how you keep yourself protected. Okay, nice. Okay, let's now talk about conflicts of interest. So we've done ex parte. Conflicts of interest occur when you're a member of a governing body and you have a personal or private interest in the matter that's pending before you. So that would be a conflict. Now, what do? Colorado law requires you to do all of the following things. You have to disclose to the staff and at the hearing, do not vote, and do not attempt to influence the votes of others. That's really where the leaving the room comes from, is to try and get at that piece. Now you'll see down here in the bottom right, there's an exception. That exception is that if you have a conflict, you may vote, notwithstanding this personal or private interest, if that member's participation is necessary to achieve a quorum or otherwise enable the body to act, and disclosure was made. A very specific disclosure, though. This is, I'll read out the citation again for those citation wonks. This is section 24.18.110 of the Colorado Code of Ethics for Public Officials and Employees. And this requires disclosure in writing to the Secretary of State prior to the official action. So again, the exception is if you need them for a quorum or otherwise to act, and that advanced written disclosure was made to the Secretary of State. So a little heavy process there. All right, let's have some more fun and put this to the test. 2 scenario questions for you. 1, an applicant claims that one of the Planning Commission members has a conflict of interest because he always votes no on her projects. Is that a conflict of interest? What do you guys think? We hear no. That's right. Anyone want to expand? Why not? Not a conflict. That's right. That's no conflict. And what if this member, that's right, no personal gain. What if this member has publicly stated that he doesn't trust the applicant? What about that? Does that make a difference? Should be based on the standards. Yep. Yeah, it is a problem to show bias ahead of a decision. And then I guess the question is, you know, especially in tighter knit communities, you know, what is the implication of saying, you know, trust someone? You're talking about the application, not a conflict, but a trust issue. Oh, yes. Okay, yeah, so this is a sticky one, but it is trying to get at that line between conflicts of interest and other topics. Absolutely. Okay, so that was a little tricky, teasing that out. Okay, now let's do another one. You are convinced that your fellow Planning Commission member has a conflict of interest. What do you do then? Yeah, you guys got that bias issue on the last one. Good. So what do? Ask the attorney. Yep, always good to go to your resource people to figure out what to do. They'll certainly have some thoughts. Talk to the attorney in the chair. That's another option. Raise the issue to the Planning Commission. Yep, you could question them. That's true. You know, if you have that relationship, you can just ask them, ask the administrator too. You know, hey, this is what I'm noticing. What do you think? Yeah, so you've got a lot of resource people is what you're all pointing out that you can talk to about, how do I handle this? What are the parameters here? That kind of thing. Right on. Okay. Yeah, I guess the other thing I would mention is make sure that you have a strong disclosure process. Okay, let's talk a couple minutes about open meetings. The underlying principle of the open meetings law is that the formation of public policy is public business and therefore cannot be conducted in secret. So where 3 or more of the body conducting business are subject to the law, or 2 if that's a quorum. Well, let me pause there and say, the requirements here are having public notice for meetings where there's formal action that occurs, public business is discussed, or a quorum is present. And that's when you need to have minutes, that there's formal action. And then, we have here a suggested rule of practice is just to have everything be open and noticed with minutes. That's just a way to play it safe. Yes, and I guess the other thing I'll mention too is that a meeting is any kind of gathering that's convened to conduct public business, whether in person, by telephone, electronically, or other means. Okay, so that's open meetings. Let's explore that a little bit with one scenario question. Here we have, after a particularly rough public hearing, the planning commissioners all agree to grab a beer and relax and unwind. Are there any issues or concerns with this? Yes, a bunch. Yeah, what are the concerns? Appearance only unless they talk business. Yeah, it's a risk. That's a risk to talk business. Public appearance, absolutely. That's a risk too. So you guys are getting it. A very conservative approach would be just to notice things ahead of time. That could keep you safe. Don't talk business. Yeah, that can be tough though, right? When you get together and you have that in common, you may slip into that. So it's a strong approach to, if you're really gonna have some of these get-togethers, just notice it. Maybe that feels odd. And then here, does your answer change if they decide, for example, to have lunch before a public hearing? So that's getting at the timing. But I think you're all kind of hitting on it. It's really about getting together. Do you have a quorum? Might you talk about public business? Well, if so, then that's a possible problem. Still need to notice, yes. Okay. Great comments. Okay. Now that we've talked about open meetings, so the hazards, let's talk about immunity. The Colorado Governmental Immunity Act, this protects government officials when acting within the scope of their duties. And I'll pause here and say, I've just noticed a couple people having sound issues. It looks like there are some thoughts of how to fix it. All right, if you're having sound issues and that's a more pervasive problem out there than it seems, please put it in the chat so that we know if we need to try and take some kind of broad-based action. Okay, phone is clear, sound is fine, okay. All right, so if you're having issues, maybe we'll do some one-on-one troubleshooting with you. One person moved from Chrome to Explorer and experienced an improved sound. Okay, thanks. All right, so let's get back to business. Okay, so the Governmental Immunity Act protects government officials when acting within the scope of their duties. How do you lose your immunity? Because mayhem can come for you. You can lose your immunity by prejudging a matter, by engaging in ex parte contacts, by making a decision that violates established laws, or acting beyond the scope of your authority. Those are pretty clear, right? Ignoring or going against publicly given legal advice, and ignoring or acting outside of the bounds of established procedures or ordinances. So that's how you lose your immunity. All right, let's do a scenario. on this. The mayor, who has been elected an elected leader for decades, calls up the newest planning commissioner a few days before a hearing to give some background information on a development application that will be on the agenda. Is there an issue with this approach? What do you think in the chat? Is there an issue, and if so, what is that issue? Yes, there's an issue. Okay. Yes, I'm in agreement. There is an issue. Review your job descriptions to your boundaries must be disclosed. Yes. Okay. So you're getting at that, you know, this, hey, this is an ex parte contact. Not cool. It's outside the public record. Yes, you guys are getting it. That's right. And as the strong protectors of due process, we cannot stand for this. Okay, good job. Okay, one more. I think this might be the last one in this segment as well. How about this? After the vote at a planning commission hearing, a member decides to testify at the elected board meeting to represent the minority opinion. And I know that this is a strong poll. Is this acceptable? What do you think out there? We got a quick no, not acceptable. No, and a yes, lots of different thoughts on this. And also consider what's possibly a better approach. Should be in the record anyway. Yeah. So I would offer up that as you're thinking about this, that, you know, a couple issues. First, it's this minority opinion holder, they are on the record already. So going before the board kind of gives them two bites at the apple. You know, being on the planning commission, you know, with great power comes great responsibility, and getting those two bites can be a little unfair. So that voice is in the record already. And then second, you know, to this last question here down at the bottom, what if the elected board sends it back? That can be a problem. So for those two reasons, best to avoid that move. Nice thoughts. Okay, now this section isn't usually part of the presentation, but I received requests to discuss it a bit. So we're going to talk about planning and pandemics here in our COVID-19 context that we're in. And I've structured this brief segment into key issues that are bubbling to the top that we've been hearing a lot about lately, and then a slew of resources. So let's take a look. Trends and key issues. Here's some of the things that we have been hearing that are important for people to be thinking about, or they have a lot of questions about. So these are the trends and key issues as far as planning in a pandemic context. First, setting up recovery teams. There have been some varied approaches to this across the state. Budgeting and fiscal health has been coming up, and thinking about how to be sort of resilient in that, and maybe even first step measures to take. Equity and inclusivity, especially right at the beginning. I know in the chat about, I think, a scenario question, someone mentioned creative community outreach. That was a good comment back then and comes up here again. Public space and facilities. So considering, what does your public space look like? What do your public facilities look like? You know, are they flexible in this sort of new reality, or for future realities we're not yet confronted with? Built environment and public health. So considering, you know, do we have a healthy built environment? Are there tweaks we need to make? Data and demographics. Just considering, you know, what's the best data to use? You know, how do we consider our community? Local economy. So recovery and resiliency. Both that meaning both the response, and then thinking about how do we make sure we have a resilient economy? Do we have a diversified economy? Questions like that have been rising up. Exacerbated affordable housing shortage has been coming up a lot, as well as strong public engagement and messaging. So these are some of the key trends and issues to think about. And everyone's context is a little different. So I'm going to spend most of the time showing you a couple resources, and before we have our final segment for the training today. All right, so first off, the DLG has a COVID-19 website, and you can see over on the left here all the sub-tabs, everything from financial advice, continuity of operations, administrative burdens, etc. Lots of information on there. And I did go into continuity of operations to show you this screenshot where you can really dig in on everything from budget to Tabor elections. And down below that, there's even best practices on running virtual meetings. If you have some concerns or questions around that, lots of information on there. I mentioned CRO's website at the beginning. They have all kinds of stuff on there. This is their whole COVID-19 hub. They've got the community adaptation hub, shows you what specific communities have been doing. And then they have a webinar page as well that's got a whole bunch of information. And they've launched a webinar series that will be posted on that site. And the first one's actually going to be next Thursday. So in 1 week is going to be on setting up local recovery and resiliency teams. So you can hear from 4 communities who have done this with sort of different models and how that's been working. This whole series is free. It's going to cover all kinds of topics, really trying to hit on everything in that trends and key issues list that we just looked at. They're going to try and touch on. So contact Melissa Ryder if you would like to figure out how to get signed up for that, or contact me. I can get you connected to the right people. So that'll work too. Okay, let's do a quick review because we covered a lot this afternoon. So to recap, we went through the importance of an authority to plan. We talked about roles and responsibilities, relationships, integrating and implementing plans and policies. We considered meeting management, decision-making, and leaving solid findings and a record of decision. We talked about a lot of legal and ethical issues, as well as a bonus pandemic piece. So remember, the CDO website is just a sort of treasure trove of information. And the last comment that I'd like to make is, in some of these workshops recently, an idea has come up around, okay, well, what should we do next, especially if we've got a lot of new planning commissioners, for example. Well, a good next idea might be to set up some training sessions or speakers or meetings with various service providers, water, fire, police, etc. It's just really great to connect with them, figure out what their plans are, and how that all works together. I have no reason for including the picture I did other than I think it's hilarious that Brush has a Brush Dental. That's awesome. So I wanted to include that for fun for you here at the end of our talk together. And so the last thing that I'll say is, thank you so much for joining this webinar and being such curious and dedicated advocates for your communities. Thanks for having a great chat. It was amazing to see your comments in there and some questions and some back and forth. We'll be posting the recording of this webinar to our website if there's anything you want to revisit, or if you know anyone who wasn't able to join, or I know some of you had to leave early, you can go check it out there. And as always, please feel free to reach out at any time to talk planning. Thank you and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.